Well, hello everybody. Alex Kapitko here. This is the Centered from Reality podcast. It's kind of a cold, snowy Friday here in Chicago, Illinois. I've been working on a paper and just watching the news. God, it's been a wild week. Have to admit I haven't slept as many hours over the last couple nights as I was hoping to. Just kind of following up with everything, and there's kind of this weird nervous energy. I don't know. Hopefully that gets better, but I was hoping maybe things would kind of calm down a little bit, but it looks like now that train is leaving the station. So, anyways, just to start, President Biden actually has announced his pick for the Supreme Court. And it looks like I was right back in January when I talked about my prediction for who it would be. Anyways, it's Ketanji Brown Jackson, who I quite like. I think it's a good pick. She is fairly young at 51, so that means she can be there for a while, which is important considering the fact that the Republicans have pretty much stacked the Supreme Court, even though the majority of the nation doesn't quite reflect some of those views. But it's good to see that he's made the decision on her and they can start the process because I think it's, if I remember correct, I think Breyer will be retiring in June. So just to give a refresher on her, The Economist notes that Biden promoted her from a district court to the Circuit Court of Appeals in the District of Columbia, so D.C. She was confirmed unanimously in a voice to vote in the Senate 9 years ago. She also has dual degrees from Harvard and spent 2 years as a public defender. And as I mentioned in a previous episode, Biden is actually probably one of the biggest positives of his administration that no one's really talking about, is he's created a trend of nominating defenders to federal courts. And like I said in the episode about a month ago, I think it's great because we have a pretty failed justice system and a failed prison system. And I think it's great to have a defender's perspective in our highest courts because there's kind of a prosecutorial, I guess, leaning in terms of how we judge these things historically. And so it's nice to see someone who's actually seen on the ground what our legal system does to people and who's had to actually defend them. And for example, Miss Jackson, who's Biden's nominee, helped revise sentencing guidelines that imposed really, really harsh penalties for crack cocaine that disproportionately affected Black Americans. And I think in general, again, there's a lot of people who don't like the fact that Biden off the bat announced, I'm going to pick a black woman. Okay, whatever. You can say you don't like that. I think he could have done it smoother, but clearly smoothness is not a big skill of the Biden administration by any means. But I think it's important to add someone with a different perspective. And I think it does, in these very dark times, divisive times, I think it's one light that we need to remember kind of shines sometimes. I don't particularly think there's going to be a big fight over this one. The sad reality is that the Republicans have played dirty and now they have a nice majority in the Supreme Court. I'm against court packing. I'm against expanding the Supreme Court. So I think at the moment, this is the best bet. And this nomination, to be frank, won't really hurt Republicans because they already have a majority and Breyer's a Democrat. So it's basically just replacing a Democrat with a Democrat. Or not basically, that's what it is. And so, at least from Mitch McConnell and more of the, it's bad when I'm calling him sane, but of the kind of sane traditional Republican types, I don't think they want to make this a fight like the Kavanaugh hearing, for example, mainly because they know that they can win the midterms right now, and I think they don't want to look toxic going into the midterms. Obviously, that's hard when you have the Trumpy wing and the Matt Gaetz and the Marjorie Taylor Greens and the Gazpacho police, but I think the more traditional Republicans know that they have a great opportunity to take back the House and the Senate, potentially, and they don't want to fuck that up, basically. So I think they're going to keep this pretty mellow. But I must just say, to keep it light for a second here before we take a unfortunately dark turn again, is that I'm sure Biden must be tired as hell. He must have had just an insane week. What was it, 2 nights ago? Wednesday night. He was meeting with Vladimir Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, at the wee hours of the morning because it was late for me and I was watching. And the East Coast is an hour ahead. So I'm going, boy, Biden's not getting his sleep that a 78-year-old needs. I just think about my dad, who's younger than Biden. But he needs to get his sleep, and, he goes to bed fairly early, and he's cranky if he doesn't get his sleep, and Biden's older, and, I do worry about the guy, and there's a lot of pressure right now. I mean, we have COVID, supply chains, potentially a conflict in Europe, we'll call for now, and if he gets crankier at press conferences, I think we'll know why. Anyways, continuing on, that was actually, surprisingly, probably the lightest part of this episode today, but I'm going to do probably a more in-depth look at Ukraine next week. So I'm just going to touch on a few things here real quick, and then I actually want to talk about Florida's Don't Say Gay bill, as they're calling it. That's going to be kind of the main thing I'm going to talk about here in a few minutes, but I did just want to say a few things about this ever-continuing conflict. I've seen memes online, and I also just have to say I am mind blown. I have seen a very strange wing of the progressive, very young progressive generation who are basically saying, oh, there was an airstrike in Yemen yesterday. No one's talking about that. There was an airstrike in Syria yesterday by the U.S. No one's talking about that. The media is focused on Nazis in Ukraine, and the U.S. is helping Nazis in Ukraine, and who cares? Like, why are we worried about this? And I was kind of appalled because it really shows such a lack of understanding, such a lack of context, history, ethics, morality. Okay, look, Yemen is one of the worst things the U.S. is doing right now. Us and our Saudi allies have been aiding and embedding a civil war between the Houthi rebels and other groups in the area, and it's disgusting. And Obama got us in there. Trump continued it, and Biden hasn't pulled us out of it, and it's atrocious. Two things, like I said yesterday, two things can be true at once here. Is that how broken our society is? Is that we can't say, hey, what's happening in Yemen is a tragedy. But then can't we also say that Ukraine, literally 3 days ago, was just doing their thing? And now there's Russian tanks, troops, and air raids, and as of an hour ago, it looks like they're going to be storming the Capitol tonight. So it just blows my mind that, and then there's the Nazi thing. People are saying that the U.S. is helping neo-Nazis and fascists. The only fascist I see is Putin. I just want to make that clear. There are neo-Nazi groups inside of Ukraine. But, again, if you understood the history of what is happening, first, Vladimir Zelensky is Jewish. He got elected with, I think, 73% of the vote in 2019. Yeah, okay. So he's not a Nazi, I'm assuming. Also, let's look at the fact that this country has a history of keeping out Nazis. They tried to hold out as well as they could against the actual Nazi party and army during Nazi Germany. And yeah, there's extremist groups there. Of course there are. But just because we're talking about Ukraine, it's because it just happened. It's because it just happened, right? It just blows my mind that, you have on one side the Tucker Carlsons that are just like, well, Putin didn't ruin our economy. Putin didn't create a virus. Putin doesn't call me racist. Why should I hate Putin? And I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said that last night on TV. And it's like, because Putin is trying to invade a sovereign territory. But it's just too bad to see that the far, far left also sees this as not our cause. It surprises me. But anyways, I just wanted to say that I've come to a sad realization kind of about the state of the country. I think it really hit me yesterday when I watched Trump at Mar-a-Lago, I think it was last night, give a speech where he basically talked about Putin. It was impressive how cheap and quickly he got into Ukraine. And, we should have that on our southern border. Which is ironic because imagine if Mexico tried to take, let's say New Mexico or Texas or California. Do you think we would just let them do it? Because that's basically what Trump's saying, is he's like, okay, well, let's just say if Mexico tries to take California, would we let that happen? But I think when I saw him again kind of just praising Putin, it just blows my mind that our country is in this strange place and it's so divided that kind of who our president is actually could define which side of this conflict we're on. You know, I think if Trump was president, he would probably be forced to respond in strong rhetoric. I like to think that, just because the national security apparatus around him would almost like require it. But I don't think we'd see such a strong rhetorical anger towards Putin. And it kind of blows my mind is that, you know, if Biden is president, we're going to be condemning what Russia's doing. Yet if Trump, say, got reelected, he would probably at least praise Putin or at least kind of take his side. And so that's just scary. Which party is in office may actually decide which side of this conflict we're on. And then it doesn't help when you have these kind of tankies, as I've heard them called, who I think have good intentions on the left. They're saying, like, there's atrocities committed by the U.S. military every day. Sure. But there's also a huge atrocity that could lead to a giant conflict if we're not careful. You know, things aren't mutually exclusive. It's not a black and white world. But it's just a shame that when we already have this national populist Republican movement that is so anti what Biden's doing no matter what, that we also now have a wing of the very far left that seems to almost agree. You know, it's not useful right now. This is a conflict that is going to bring everyone in. And I just find it surprising when you're comparing it to Syria or Yemen. It's different places, different situations. Anyways, I have Fox News on in the background here, and President Zelensky has confirmed, along with other Ukrainian officials, that, I'm reading, Russian forces will storm Kyiv tonight. It was inevitable. I've never watched this much cable news in my life, but it's been inevitable if you've been watching anything over the last couple days. But it's, Kyiv is a metropolitan city with obviously the face of the Ukrainian government there, and the Russians are coming in from what looks like a three-faceted attack. And some of the videos I've seen, I mean, the Ukrainian people in Kyiv are, hiding in subways, just hoping to make it through this, and I saw an interview on CNN last night of a parliament member whose name's escaping my mind, and as she was begging for help from the international community, there were jets flying over, and a Russian jet got shot down outside of Kyiv. It's serious. It's really serious, and I worry for the safety of Vladimir Zelensky and other members of his party. I was reading just a few minutes ago that Zelensky is target number one, and there's reports that Russian-backed separatists or extremists have entered the city, and he is target number one. And he's surprised me. He's an actor who played a principal in a show which has a name I can't pronounce, but I've read about it and it sounded really cool. And he's a principal who I guess has a speech about the Ukrainian system and ends up becoming president in the show. And ironically, he got such success from this show that he ended up running and winning to become president of Ukraine. And yeah, he doesn't have experience in politics, and so there's obviously going to be issues. And I think he was too slow to realize that Russia was actually coming in here. But at the same time, he posted a selfie, it had to be about 5 hours ago now, said he's not leaving. He's on the streets with the people. I'm sure he's terrified because, the Russians or the extremists or whoever's now looking for him, he could die. He could easily die tonight. And he's not leaving. It's not like in Afghanistan where Ghani just fled as soon as the Taliban was near Kabul. This guy's impressed me, and I hope he keeps it up. Also, off of that, sanctions. I wanted to just share my thoughts on sanctions. I know that I understand the general plan of the sanctions, and probably in the long run it's going to work, right? It's crippling the Russian economy, making the actual civilian population in Russia so uncomfortable that they have to step up or say something or protest. They also want to hurt Putin and his allies because they're using our international banking system. There's also the SWIFT system. The Russian ruble is collapsing as we speak, and I understand it. But it looks like Putin and his allies have prepared for this. So what we do now with sanctions, it could stop a future invasion. But what's happening now, it's not going to stop. And I came to that realization last night, and it kind of pains me to say is that what they need is arms. What they need is people on the ground. What they need is support. You know, it looks like the attacks are just going to escalate. Sanctions work over a long period of time, debatably. They're not going to stop this. And hypothetically, what happens if the Russians take Kyiv? I think it's a question that we all need to probably start asking ourselves, because I also saw from CNN that national security advisors have worried that Kyiv will fall in days. And I think that brings up a conundrum that we are going to have to address at some point. What happens if Kyiv falls to Russian allied forces? Going off of this, just some more updates. Some 18,000 guns with ammunition have been distributed to reservists in the Kyiv region alone. Also, guns pretty much are available and legal now to stand up. Petro Poroshenko, the ex-president or former president of Ukraine until 2019, I saw a picture of him today armed with an AK on the streets of Kyiv, and he said Putin will never take this country. You know, it tells you, I think, a lot about the state of what's happening right now when the former president is on the streets with an AK saying Russia's not taking this from us. It's mind-blowing. I've seen videos of kids as young as 14 carrying AKs. Apparently they're making Molotovs, getting prepared. Molotov cocktails, that is. Handmade, improvised explosives you can throw and they explode. Anyways, this tells me it's going to be bloody. And so I do think NATO and the United States and our allies, we do need to think about what is next. And it's a difficult conversation because we really don't want to be boots on the ground in Ukraine. But at the same time, clearly Putin's already lied about what he wants. And our intelligence has been correct. And our intelligence now says Kyiv is falling in days. Doesn't look good. Also on that, of course, look at me. I'm going longer than I thought on this issue again. But for the first time, the NATO response force has been activated in a defensive measure, which is interesting. This is opening up another can of worms, I guess you could say. So NATO's Supreme Allied Commander, who's General Todd Walters, he actually activated this multinational force consisting of land, air, sea, and special operations. And these are allies in the region that can deploy quickly in support of the NATO alliance. Now, this is where I'm confused. Like, I'm honestly confused. Biden said we're not sending troops into Ukraine, but we have troops in Romania, Poland, Lithuania. I'm missing something here, but you know what I mean. How do we defend if the fighting is going in Ukraine? Unless we actually get involved, and then Putin obviously said we would see massive retaliation if we did that. Like, this rhetoric is starting to go in a cycle, in a circle that confuses me. And eventually it's going to catch up with us here. But the fact that for the first time ever, this NATO response force has been activated, and do we wait for them to come out of Ukraine? I mean, by then, the massive devastation, I can't even imagine here. But I do see us on the brink, definitely on the brink of war, because there's going to be a point where something happens, right? I mean, we kind of have to remember that once an escalation starts, once a war starts, which Putin started, it's really hard to control what's going to happen. That's what worries me, is now all these moving pieces are out of almost Russia's control. And yeah, we're just going to have to wait and see on that. I also have to say that the Russian strategy is like triple or quadruple faceted here, where you have Russian forces coming from Crimea in the south, north from Belarus, east from kind of northeast from the Donetsk region. It kind of looks like they're trying to encircle and close off the Ukrainian army. Some guys, I don't know, just hope of optimism is that what I wrote it here. It's hard to find. I'm sorry. It's a protests in Russia. You know, the younger generation are pissed. And it's really risky to protest against this government right now. And the police are obviously sending a lot of people away. It's brave. And there's a Russian tennis player today who wrote on the camera, "Please no war." The Russian people don't want this, but unfortunately in Moscow, they are being lied to about what's happening. They were told it was a successful operation from what I saw on MSNBC yesterday. Anyways, I am just seeing actually now, looking up at the TV behind me, or ahead of me, I guess you could say, is that it looks like the U.S. has provided Zelensky with protection. So we're going to have to see if Putin thinks that's a sign of war as well. Anyways, let's move on from Ukraine, because there's not a lot to report right now, except that I think this is getting really volatile really quickly, and it's all Putin's fault. I don't care what the far left or the far right say. This is Putin's fault, and it's the right thing to do to at least help Ukraine, because I'm watching these people on the ground, and they don't deserve this. No one deserves this. Anyways, I will talk about Ukraine more next week. You know, like I said, Putin's created a scenario where there's so many moving parts that it's almost destined to end poorly for everyone, because once an invasion starts, there's so many pieces that are out of your control. But anyways, I'll talk I'm sure more about this next week. But anyways, I wanted to cover this on last Tuesday, but as you guys know, things kind of changed. According to NPR, yesterday, Thursday, Florida's House of Representatives passed a controversial bill limiting when and how teachers and school staff can discuss gender and sexual orientation. So the controversy of this bill is basically that opponents call it the "Don't Say Gay" bill, and worry that it's going to lead to ignoring bullying and conversations about basically gay and trans issues. And these are already communities that see higher levels of suicide, bullying, etc. And so opponents, to sum it up, opponents of this bill would say that it's making life more difficult for LGBTQ, etc. people. And the bill is actually called HB 1557. And it's mainly being defended by Republicans, actually all Republicans, sorry. And they claim that the bill aims to have schools teach gender and sexuality at an appropriate age, and to keep parents informed about what's happening in the classroom. That sounds reasonable, I guess. I don't think anyone would disagree that if your kids are like in elementary school, you're not going to be talking about gay sex or something like that, or whatever it may be. You're not going to talk about trans issues or homosexuality, but at the same time, just because they're a certain age doesn't mean that those conversations can't be allowed to be had or can't be accessible to people, because you're basically limiting a small percentage of the people who actually, based on statistics, need help more than other communities. And so you're basically like cutting them out of the discourse at a time when they probably need the discourse more than others. And I hate the bill. I really do. I think it's atrocious. The NPR article on this bill discusses how, in quotes, the legislation prohibits any instruction about sexuality or gender between kindergarten and third grade, or in a matter that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards. It would also guarantee parents access to their children's education and health records. I don't know what that's stupid. And require that schools notify parents if there is a change in the student's services or monitoring related to the student's mental, emotional, or physical health or well-being, and the school's ability to provide a safe and supportive learning environment for the student. End quotes. First off, I don't think this is creating a safe environment when you can't talk about issues that could come up. That's already limiting free speech. That's singling out one community. I know they talk about prohibiting instruction about sexuality or gender between kindergarten and third grade. Look, guys, how many of you had conversations in your second grade class about trans or gay rights? I didn't. I don't think most people do. I don't think that's what teachers are trying to do. Like, civics are obviously struggling. Like, I'm actually working on a paper right now about this, about how our civics programs in elementary through high school are declining, and we do need to focus on that. But can't we also have conversations with kids if they need them? Anyways, it's interesting because 7 Republicans actually did vote against this bill. They crossed over and were like, hell no, we're not voting for this. And it surprised me, but it more surprised me because of how tribal our politics are. It doesn't surprise me because I'm on the right in some sense, and I would have voted against this. But I guess it just surprises me that in this climate in Florida, there were actually 7 people that voted against it. I'm sure they'll be primaried anyways. So yeah, I guess you could say this bill is part of a more broad trend in a lot of the United States where it's basically like mainly Republicans are saying we're trying to limit elementary school students from being taught radical ideas that they're actually not being taught, but they hear stories from elites or whatever and they react to it. It's very reactive. And we're seeing this across the country, and that's why I'm focusing on this one, though, because I think this one is so focused that it does worry me. I'll start by saying that I don't understand why these Republican states are so fixated on what parents think. And they've kowtowed to parents at any cost. Like, look, parents should be involved in their kids' education, obviously. I don't think anyone's debating that. But I don't know if they should be the ones making decisions about what their kids are learning or the school district policies based on what they're learning. The curriculum should not be up to the parents. I'm sorry. Like, unless the parents are teachers, they should not be the ones knowing what's right for their kids to learn. I'm sorry. That's just not your expertise. Like, look, like when I taught in Spain for those 3 years, I knew I tutored as well on the side to make some extra money. And like, there's a lot of smart parents who work in tech or they're lawyers or they own a business or they write or whatever. They had fucking sometimes nuts views on education. Just because you're smart in one field doesn't mean you should be dictating education policy. So I'm surprised that like the Republicans are so worried about what the parents think about the curriculum. It's never happened before. I mean, I don't remember 2 years ago even that parents were, deciding, oh, are we going to talk about critical race theory or blah, 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 blah. It's all just reactive. And also just on a humanity level, I think that this bill is insane because, as I'm sure most of you know, I'm pretty hands-off with social policies. I kind of consider myself a centrist civil libertarian, and this is another example, I guess, of the authoritarian tendencies on the right that are trying to keep an issue out of sight, out of mind by basically banning conversations that make them or their voters uncomfortable. And it's going to be awful for the gay and trans community. I have no doubt about it. I've been trying to think of implications of this bill. One that comes to mind is what happens if a teacher is gay and married, for example, and they're not allowed to put up a picture on their desk, maybe show them their spouse, right? Like, Obviously, heterosexual, straight teachers always do this. They can have a picture of them and their spouse and family on their desk. But it kind of seems to me from this Don't Say Gay Bill 1557 is that if you're a gay teacher, you pretty much have to keep your own preferences out of mind. You can't talk about it. It's like don't ask, don't tell to the extreme. And that's not right. You're singling out one community, and there's a double standard. Like straight teachers can talk about their marriage or post about their marriage as much as they want, but gay people can't. And I don't know. I don't like those type of dichotomies in society. I don't like those type of double standards, hypocritical policies, whatever you want to call them. That just sounds pretty repressive to me, to be honest. Like, look, I think it should depend on what the people want, but I'm not sure if the Florida people actually know what they're being given, if that's the right way to say it with this. Also, think about it from a kid's perspective. What if, for example, a middle school kid, let's just use that hypothetical, a middle school kid is being bullied for being perceived as gay. What if they don't identify with their gender, assigned at birth, and get bullied for that? Now it looks like this bill limits how a school official could intervene or at least help this kid. Can they help the kid get counseling or information? I don't think so, because it looks like this bill would discourage this conversation from happening in the first place. This is just limiting, I think, help, which kind of surprises me, and it goes back to maybe a bigger issue is that I'm surprised that they're even trying to pass this, because it's like there's just people in society that are gay or trans. Like, we're all different. We all have different biological makeup. We all have different views. We all have different experiences. And this bill looks like it's not understanding that people are different. And it's trying to do a one-size-fits-all approach to dealing with an issue that is clearly not that. There's an article in the Tallahassee Democrat, which is a local newspaper, and it's called LGBTQ Advocates Say Don't Say Gay Bill Hurts Student Privacy. And I guess before this, there was this Harding bill that actually looked to out kids after 6 weeks, even when they could be abused or abandoned or neglected, was potentially the possibility of them being outed. And there's reports of kids literally just being outed. And then, for example, maybe they got disowned by their parents. Maybe they got kicked out of their sports team or their club or whatever. It's like, is this actually solving an issue, or are you just singling out trans and gay kids and making their life hell? And that's kind of what this whole thing seems like to me, is you're just making people's lives hell. And as a civil libertarian and someone who just kind of wants everyone to be happy and live and thrive, that fucking sucks, It should not be the government who outs you to your family, for example. That's that's mind-blowing. And but this article, anyways, going back to that, is basically talking about how this Don't Say Gay bill could also hurt privacy, because it's not as extreme as this Harding bill that was outing kids after 6 weeks. But it looks like this bill, let me see here. So these are two sides of the argument for this bill based on this article. Is that Harding and other opponents, obviously the Harding bill, like I said, got repealed, but they say the bill will empower parents to be involved in conversations about their students' sexual identity. Who wants to have that conversation, right? Especially if you're in a school and the kids are under 15 or something. Who gives a fuck? But opponents of this bill basically say that sometimes schools are the safest place for kids to talk about their sexuality. Their home life may be dangerous. And this legislation is kind of making this situation completely worse, because the kids can't talk about it at school. They also can't talk about it at home. And now teachers who actually may be able to help them are not allowed to talk about it. And it just does kind of piss me off in a sense, because what is the end goal of this? Is it just to literally isolate a percentage of our country's population who are people that deserve to live like the rest of us? I don't get it, and obviously Ron DeSantis needs to sign it into action, but it sounds like he will. And there's a great article from, what's it called, NBC, that says, from book bans to don't say gay bill, LGBTQ kids feel erased in the classroom. And I'll just say that it's, Drew and I on the old podcast did an episode about this back in, probably a year ago or so. And, we talked about critical race theory, for example. And I do have issues sometimes with the Ibram X. Kemdys and the white fragility, stuff like that. Like, I do think sometimes these books are biased and inflammatory. But at the same time, just because you're trying to make sure everyone feels like they are valued and being heard, and that also our students are learning the truth, that should not mean that there's a backlash that means we're going to ban things. Banning things does not work, and I'm just surprised that the right are the ones who are doing this, because it's usually been a pretty right-wing idea to kind of let everyone speak. The idea of free speech is not to protect good speech, but to protect bad speech sometimes. And I'm just mind blown that the Republicans have gone completely flipped on that. So, but this article, talks about how last year legislatures in 30 states weighed legislation that would ban trans kids from competing on school sports teams. So far this year, 27 states have proposed similar bills, with South Dakota enacting its version of the legislation just this month. At least 20 states have proposed measures that would, limit transgender and gender-affirming healthcare programs. Like, the point of this is I don't know what the end goal is, like, unless you're just trying to actually divide and alienate people. Again, there's a conversation to be had about trans athletes in professional sports. That's not the conversation they're having here. They're basically telling a 15-year-old that if you don't feel comfortable in your own body, we're going to alienate you, separate you, and make sure you're not okay. And, it's just like the party that I've spent the majority of my life identifying with. What is their problem? Like, it's something I ask myself all the time, and I don't get a lot of answers. But, yeah, I just wanted to highlight this bill a little bit. But I thank you guys, as always, for listening. I'm taking the weekend off. No podcast this weekend. I'll be back next week with probably more coverage on Ukraine. And again, I just saw on CNN here, I'm looking up from the TV, I'd switched from Fox News. Apparently Putin, people close to him think he is seriously ill. And honestly, it does kind of seem like a guy who's at his last, let's just say his last stage, and he's making a point. Anyways, YouTube, Twitter, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify. You can find me there. I'll be back next week. Try to have a good weekend. Detach. I know I'm not going to be able to, but I'm going to try. But anyways, thanks, guys.